I always knew my parents didn't see much value in me, but I didn't think they hated me enough to throw me out like trash on a random Tuesday evening, right after dinner, right after pretending everything was normal. It started with my dad's fork slamming against the plate, the sharp metal echo slicing through the silence as he glared at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "You're a useless failure," he said calmly at first, too calmly, the kind of calm that hides a storm big enough to wipe out everything in its path. "You contribute nothing. You do nothing. You are nothing." My mother didn't even look up. She just kept chewing, eyes dead, as if she'd been waiting years to hear those words spoken out loud. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or sit there frozen, because if there was one thing in this world I wasn't, it was a failure, but they had no idea. They didn't know where I went every day, what I actually did for work, or what the numbers in my accounts looked like. They thought I was some pathetic loser who couldn't hold a job, who slept all day, who wasted his life on a computer hobby. They didn't know that hobby earned me $19.5 million a year. They didn't know because I never told them, not after realizing long ago that their love was conditional, thin, brittle, and quick to shatter the moment I didn't obey them like a puppet. "Pack your things," my father barked suddenly, flipping his chair back as he stood. "Go live in the streets. Maybe then you'll learn something." My mother finally spoke, her voice cold enough to freeze bone. "You've been a disappointment since the day you were born. Maybe suffering will help you figure yourself out." And then she went back to her food. That was the part that stung, their indifference, their lack of hesitation, their absolute belief that throwing me out was the right thing to do. For a second, I wondered if I should defend myself, yell back, reveal everything, tell them about the multi-million-dollar contracts, the high-profile clients who paid for my cybersecurity consulting, the seven-figure retainers from companies terrified of data breaches, the digital assets I managed for CEOs who trusted me more than my own parents ever had. Maybe I should have looked them in the eyes and said, "Failure? I make more in a month than you've made in your entire lives combined." But no, they didn't deserve that satisfaction. They didn't deserve to know. They deserved the consequences of their assumptions. So I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a quiet scrape that sounded louder than any scream, and I walked to my room. My father shouted something behind me, something about how I should be grateful he hadn't kicked me out earlier, how I was lucky he didn't call the police, as if I were a criminal instead of their child. I didn't respond. I didn't pack anything expensive. I didn't take the jewelry they'd given me years ago or the clothes they bought. I didn't need any of it. Everything that mattered was in my room. My laptop, my backup drives, my encrypted hardware wallets, the blueprint of the life I had built without them. As I zipped my bag, I realized something strange. I wasn't sad. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even angry. I was relieved. Free. Light in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. Their house had always been a prison disguised as a home, and I had spent years quietly building the financial escape plan they never saw coming. When I walked out into the living room, my mother didn't even turn her head. My father stood with his arms crossed, chin lifted like a king banishing a peasant. "You want to be a nobody? Fine. Be a nobody somewhere else," he sneered. "And don't come crawling back when you fail." That was when I smiled. Just a small one. Nothing dramatic, nothing mocking, just a calm, quiet smile that made him frown because he wasn't expecting it. He expected fear, begging, desperation. Instead, he got a smile from someone who already knew how this story would end. "Okay," I said softly. No long explanation. No guilt trip. No pleading. Just one word. Then I stepped outside. The door slammed behind me with a force that shook the frame. The night was cold, the air sharp, but it tasted like freedom. I walked down the driveway with nothing but a backpack and the knowledge that my bank account held more money than my parents would ever see in their lives. I got into my car, my real car, the one they thought belonged to a friend because I never parked it at home. I started the engine, the soft hum of a machine worth more than their house filling the quiet street. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. They had thrown me out, thinking they'd ruin me. They had no idea they'd just freed me. And as I drove away from that toxic house, Passing the familiar sidewalks of the neighborhood that had watched me grow up under their harsh shadows, I felt the future stretching in front of me. Wide, open, limitless. They thought they'd push me into the streets, but in reality, they'd pushed me into the life I was always meant to live. They didn't know who I really was. They didn't know what I had built. They didn't know that 3 weeks from now, everything in their world would come crashing down, and they would have no one to blame but themselves. 3 weeks. That's all it took for everything to shift, for the quiet balance of my life to tilt in a direction my parents never imagined, for the storm they set in motion with their cruelty to come roaring back toward them. The night they threw me out, I drove straight to the penthouse I bought 2 years ago, the one I kept secret because I never wanted them to trace the success they didn't earn, didn't nurture, didn't help create. It sat on the 41st floor overlooking the entire skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view so clean it looked unreal under the city lights. I walked into that silence with a strange heaviness in my chest, not because I missed them, but because I was finally confronting how little they had ever cared about me. The next morning, my work phone buzzed nonstop. 3 contracts needed immediate security patches. A banking client had an attempted breach that I shut down within minutes, and one of my international clients wired a bonus, a hefty one, for preventing what would have been a catastrophic data leak. By the end of the week, I had made more than my father's annual salary, without even leaving my penthouse. Meanwhile, I knew exactly what was happening back at my parents' house because word travels fast, especially in small communities where neighbors pretend they're minding their own business, but are secretly addicted to gossip. My parents told everyone I ran away after a fight, painting themselves as victims of my irresponsibility. They told my relatives I'd always been a burden, that they couldn't take it anymore, that I stormed out because I didn't want to work. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew they had kicked out a multimillionaire. But the universe has a way of balancing itself, and I didn't have to do a single thing. Everything unfolded on its own. It started when my father's factory had a major cyber issue. A ransomware attack. All systems frozen. Production halted. Employees sent home. A 6-figure loss per hour. And guess who they called for help?
Me.
Or more accurately, they called the cybersecurity firm I secretly owned under a different name, the one they'd heard about through one of their business friends. They didn't know the CEO was their failure of a son. My receptionist forwarded the request to me with a note, potential new client. Urgent. They're desperate. I stared at the company name on the screen and felt something cold settle in my stomach. I didn't respond. Not yet. The next blow came for my mother. The school where she taught had a database breach. Sensitive information leaked. Parents furious. The administration panicking. They hired an external team to investigate. And guess who they contacted?
Yes.
Me again. A different division of my company, but still mine. I watched everything from behind the scenes, invisible to them, fully aware of every email they sent while completely unaware they were begging for help from the son they threw out like garbage. But I didn't step in immediately. Not because I wanted revenge, because timing is everything. And fate wasn't done with them yet. 3 weeks after they kicked me out, I got a call from a familiar number, my mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to pick up. Finally, curiosity won. I answered. Hello. Silence. Then a shaky breath. Are you safe? She asked, voice trembling, laced with an anxiety so thick it nearly choked her words. I almost laughed. Safe? I was sitting on a balcony overlooking the city, sipping coffee worth more than their weekly groceries. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. We haven't heard from you in weeks, she continued. Your father is worried. That was a lie. My father didn't worry about anyone but himself. We'd like you to come home, she said weakly. We overreacted. Overreacted. As if throwing your child out into the street was the same as yelling too loud during an argument. As if they hadn't humiliated me, abandoned me, treated me like a burden for years. I kept my voice calm. I'm fine. I'm living somewhere else now. She hesitated. Are you working? Do you need help? The urge to laugh was almost overwhelming. I'm working, I said simply. She pressed further. Where? Doing what? For a second, I considered telling her everything.
But no.
They didn't deserve the truth, not yet. So I ended the call. Hours later, my assistant informed me that both my parents had submitted emergency service contracts to my company. One marked urgent. The other marked critical, full system collapse suspected. The irony was impossible to ignore. They thought I was homeless. They thought I was struggling somewhere. They had no idea I was the only person who could save them. But timing mattered. And I wasn't done watching. The next day, I drove past my childhood neighborhood. Not to see them, just to remind myself how far I'd come. I parked on the next street over, hidden, and saw something that almost made me stop breathing. My father, standing outside the house, red-faced, arguing with someone over the phone. His business was crashing. My mother inside, pacing by the window, rubbing her forehead like she had a migraine. They were cracking under pressure, breaking. And all I felt was nothing. No anger. No pity. No desire to rescue them. Just an eerie calm. They had thrown me out thinking they'd destroyed me. They didn't know I was the one with the power now. They didn't know the truth. I was the storm headed their way. And they were completely unprepared for what would happen when they finally discovered the identity of the man they were begging to save them. 3 weeks after being kicked out, the cracks in my parents' perfect little world spread faster than they could patch them, and I watched it all unfold like someone watching a storm they didn't cause, but definitely saw coming. Their downfall wasn't sudden. It was the slow collapse of everything they built on arrogance, stubbornness, and pride. And it was strange how easily the universe lined everything up without me lifting so much as a finger. My father's factory, his pride, the empire he bragged about every family dinner, was bleeding money by the hour. The ransomware had shut down every system. Orders were delayed. Clients furious. Employees restless. And in the middle of it all, my father, the man who once told me computers will never get you anywhere, was being crushed by a digital threat only someone like me could dismantle. Meanwhile, my mother, who had always looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out, was drowning in her own crisis. The school breach had escalated. Sensitive data leaked. Parents filed complaints. The administration blamed her team for negligence. Her spotless reputation, the thing she worshipped more than her own children, was shattering piece by piece. I sat in my penthouse, watching this chaos from a distance, not out of cruelty, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't required to fix anything for them. I wasn't required to cushion their falls, absorb their insults, or carry their burdens. They were falling on their own, the same way they'd once pushed me out without a second thought. But everything shifted the morning my company sent me the compiled reports. Both my parents had escalated their service requests. Both of their crises were now classified as severe risk events. Both required a senior-level cybersecurity strategist, and that role in my company was me. My assistant knocked on my office door around noon. "There's something you should see," she said, placing her tablet in front of me. It was a video call request from the head of the school board assigned to resolve my mother's situation. They had asked specifically for an elite cybersecurity lead. My assistant raised a brow. "Want me to decline?" I stared at the screen. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The moment where the world they crafted with their coldness collided with the world I built with my silence. I didn't decline. "Schedule it," I said. When the meeting began, I kept my camera off. The board walked me through their concerns. They praised my company's reputation, unaware they were speaking to the very child my parents dismissed as a failure. They requested a premium emergency contract. They begged for help. I gave them instructions, issued orders, assigned tasks to my own teams. They followed everything without question. The board thanked me profusely, promising immediate payment. And then the part that hit harder than I expected. They mentioned my mother by name. "She's under tremendous pressure," one of them said. "Her job is on the line. Her mental state seems fragile." I felt the faintest ripple of something, pity maybe, but it disappeared the moment I remembered her voice the night she threw me out. "You've been a disappointment since the day you were born." The board ended the call with the expectation that I would come on site for final verification. They had no idea who they were asking for. That evening, another meeting request came in, this time from the Regional Manufacturing Association involved in my father's case. Same scenario. Same desperation. Same frantic energy. They believed my company was the only one with the tools to break through the ransomware. They were right. Again, they requested the top lead. Again, that was me. I accepted the contract. Another team assembled. Another call ended. And then the inevitable happened. My phone rang. It was my father. I stared at the name on the screen, letting it vibrate against the table. Then I answered. His voice wasn't loud this time. It wasn't commanding or angry. It was small. "Where are you?" he asked quietly. I didn't respond. He swallowed. "Your mother, she's not doing well." Silence. And my factory. I could lose everything. The shaking in his voice wasn't something I was used to hearing. My father wasn't the type to show weakness. He wasn't the type to ask for help. But desperation softens even the hardest men. We need you to come home," he said, and there was no authority in his tone. Just fear. Powerlessness. The feeling he once forced on me. For a moment, I let the silence stretch. Then I said calmly, "Why?" He breathed out shakily. "Because you're still our son." I almost laughed. 3 weeks ago, I was a useless failure. 3 weeks ago, I was told to live in the streets. Now suddenly I was a son again? "I'm working," I said. "I don't have time to come home." He hesitated. "What work?" "Cybersecurity," I replied. "The same work you said would never amount to anything." His breath hitched. I could almost picture the realization flickering across his face, the acknowledgement of how wrong he'd been. But he still didn't know the full truth. "Can you help us?" he asked. His voice broke on the last word. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not in forgiveness, not in anger, but in clarity. My parents weren't calling because they loved me. They weren't calling because they regretted what they'd done. They were calling because they needed something. And for once, I didn't. I let his question hang in the air. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and before he could say another word, I ended the call. The city lights below flickered like stars trapped beneath my feet as I walked to the window. I stood there for a long time, watching the world move, thinking about how life had changed so drastically in such a short time. 3 weeks ago, my parents thought they had power over me. Now, they didn't even know the truth, that I was the one controlling the very systems they were begging for help from. They didn't know the child they threw out was the only person who could save them. They didn't know what was coming when they finally saw me walk into the boardroom, wearing the badge of the company they were kneeling to. And they didn't know that I hadn't yet decided whether I would save them at all. The morning I finally decided to face everything, the contracts, the meetings, the people who unknowingly depended on me, felt unnervingly calm, like the world was holding its breath right alongside me. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I didn't rehearse anything. I just woke up, showered, put on a black suit tailored to perfection, and walked out of my penthouse with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to fear and nothing left to lose. As the elevator carried me down 41 floors, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls. Same face, same eyes, same person they dismissed as worthless. But everything else had changed. The world saw me now. My clients saw me. My team saw me. Everyone saw what I had built. Everyone except the 2 people who should have known me best. They still pictured the boy who wasted time on a computer, the failure they pushed out of their house without blinking. The drive to my father's factory was long, cutting through industrial zones filled with warehouses, cranes, and trucks. I remembered coming here as a kid, watching my father bark orders, parade around like a king who believed he built the world with his bare hands. He used to shove his success in my face, as if it were proof I needed to be more like him, to adopt his worldview, to follow his path. Now his empire was collapsing, rotting from the inside out. Strangled by a ransomware attack he had no power to fight. And I, his failure, was the only person who could save it. When I pulled into the visitor's lot, workers stood outside in small circles, whispering anxiously. The entire factory was silent. No machines humming, no forklifts moving, no clatter of tools.
Shut down.
Frozen. Bleeding money, by the minute. I scanned my badge at the entrance and walked through the glass doors as if I owned the place. And in a way, I did. Not legally. Not on paper. But in power, in leverage, in the silent truth that they needed me more than they'd ever admit. The conference room was full. Executives. IT staff. Managers. My father. The moment I stepped inside, the conversation stopped instantly. My father turned, expecting some high-profile specialist from a big firm. Instead, he saw me. His mouth parted slightly.
Shock.
Confusion. A flicker of something like disbelief. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, face tired, stress lines etched deep into his skin. You, he whispered. The room was silent enough to hear a breath drop. I set my briefcase down and took my seat at the head of the table, the place meant for the expert they'd contracted, the place reserved for me. Let's begin, I said calmly, opening my laptop. The IT manager cleared his throat. Sir? He's your son? My father tried to speak, but nothing came out. His pride was choking him.
I didn't look at him again.
I projected the encrypted logs onto the screen. You've been infiltrated for 11 days, I said, pointing to the breach timeline.
Gasps. Panic.
Your internal system wasn't just attacked, it was scanned for vulnerabilities for months before the actual lockdown. More whispers.
Fear.
My father clenched his jaw. Can you fix it? He finally forced out. I met his eyes for the first time. There was no anger in me anymore. Just clarity. I can, I said. But this will take full authority, unrestricted access, and no interference. He nodded instantly. No arguments. No ego. The man who once laughed at my career begged through silence. I spent the next 2 hours walking them through the plan, my voice steady, their questions endless. The longer I spoke, the more the executives realized the truth. I wasn't some amateur playing with computers.
I wasn't the failure my father painted me as.
I was the best in the field. And the way they looked at me, respect, admiration, reliance, contrasted so sharply with the way my parents had treated me that it made something cold settle deeper inside me. When the meeting ended, the executives filed out, thanking me repeatedly. My father stayed behind. The door closed softly, leaving just the two of us. He stood there for a long moment, staring at me with eyes that looked older than I remembered. Why didn't you tell us? He finally asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was hollow.
Broken.
Why didn't you say you were successful? I leaned back in my chair. Would it have made a difference? He swallowed. Hard. His silence was my answer. I thought you were wasting your life, he murmured. I thought you needed pushing. Throwing me out wasn't pushing, I replied quietly. It was abandonment. He winced, and for a moment, it almost looked like he wanted to apologize, but apologies from men like him were myths, stories we tell ourselves to imagine they can change. Instead, he said, your mother is falling apart. She hasn't slept. She keeps thinking you're living on the streets. I didn't respond. He hesitated. Will you see her? I thought of her cold eyes, of the night she told me I was a disappointment from the day I was born, of how she didn't even look at me when they kicked me out, as if I'd been dead for years. Maybe, I said. His shoulders sagged. He wasn't expecting more. Before he could say another word, my phone buzzed. My assistant. A reminder. School board meeting. Urgent. MY mother's crisis. My other contract. My other battlefield. I closed my laptop. I need to go. My father opened his mouth again, maybe to thank me, maybe to cling to whatever piece of pride he had left, maybe to beg, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out. He didn't follow. Outside, the workers watched me pass, whispers trailing behind me. They knew I was the one who would save their jobs. My father's entire empire, his legacy, his identity, it all depended on the son he tried to erase. As I got into my car, the engine purring beneath me, I felt something strange. Not satisfaction, not triumph, not revenge. Just a quiet, unsettling truth settling into place. I was no longer the powerless kid they shaped. I was a man they no longer knew how to deal with. And they had no idea what I was about to walk into next, because at the school, my mother was facing the worst day of her career. And I was about to become the person everyone there was waiting for. The drive to my mother's school felt different than the drive to my father's factory. The factory was all steel, noise, machinery, his world. But the school? That was hers. That was the shrine she worshipped, the pedestal she stood on, the identity she clung to so tightly that she forgot she was a mother long before she forgot anything else. As I pulled into the parking lot, the place looked like a war zone disguised as a campus. Teachers pacing in small circles. Parents gathered near the entrance with anger radiating off them like heat from asphalt. Administrators rushing around with clipboards and panic stitched into every twitch of their eyebrows. And in the middle of all this chaos, my mother's sedan sat crookedly in the staff section, the door slightly ajar, like she had rushed out mid-breakdown or mid-breath. I walked toward the main building, ignoring the stares from staff members who, unlike my parents, recognized me. Not personally, but professionally. "That's the cybersecurity guy," someone whispered. "He's the one they flew in." I didn't correct them. Let them believe whatever made this easier. As soon as I stepped through the front doors, the principal nearly tripped rushing toward me. Sweat dotted his forehead, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. "Thank God you're here," he breathed out, shaking my hand with both of his like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "We're in serious trouble, legal trouble, political trouble, everything trouble. The parents are furious. Staff is panicking. The board wants immediate answers. Please come with me right now." I walked behind him through the halls, my footsteps echoing off tile floors I used to walk as a kid when my mother forced me to attend events I hated. Back then, she was the perfect teacher, the admired educator, the woman parents praised, administrators adored. She basked in their admiration. It fed her. It fueled her sense of superiority. And now she was the school's biggest liability. The irony tasted sharp. We entered a conference room where several board members sat stiffly, their eyes bloodshot from stress. Charts, printed logs, and breach notifications covered the walls like crime scene evidence. Everyone looked up the moment I entered. "This is the lead from the firm," the principal announced like he'd brought in a surgeon to save a dying patient. "He's been briefed on everything." "Thank you for coming," one of the board members said, voice tight. "We need your immediate assessment." I nodded, moving to the display screen as they handed me a folder thick enough to be a book. But what caught my attention wasn't the data, it was the small windowed office across the hall. My mother sat inside, alone, hands trembling over a stack of papers she wasn't reading, shoulders shaking. Not crying, she never cried, but breaking quietly in a way that looked worse than tears. She hadn't seen me. Not yet. And I didn't go to her. Not yet. Instead, I closed the conference room door and turned back to the board. "Let's begin." They scrambled to hand me details, but I already knew most of it: the alerts, the breach path, the exploited vulnerability, the chain reaction that leaked data across multiple student accounts. As they spoke over each other, I opened my laptop, projecting the structure onto the big screen. Within seconds, the room went silent. The board stared. How did you isolate it that fast?" one whispered. "Your internal team missed this completely." "That's why you hired me," I said calmly. My mother, across the hall, still hadn't looked up. The next hour stretched into something suffocating. I broke down the breach, explained the access point, outlined the risk, listed mitigation steps. Their fear was palpable. Their reliance on me was absolute. Every time I paused, they leaned forward like children waiting for answers. When I finished, the room exhaled collectively. "Can it be fixed?" "Yes," I replied. Relief washed through them so visibly it was almost embarrassing. Then the principal cleared his throat. "There's one more thing." He hesitated. "Your mother, Mrs. ___________, is being held responsible for negligence since the breach occurred in her department. If we don't resolve this, she will likely," he trailed off, not wanting to say the word. "Fired. Destroyed. Disgraced. All the things she accused me of becoming." I looked through the glass window again. My mother sat still, staring at the floor like she was seeing every wrong decision she'd ever made. I didn't rush to her. I returned my gaze to the board. "I'll handle the system," I said. "You handle the politics." They nodded vigorously. As I finished the internal assessment and sent instructions to my team, the board members filed out, leaving the room buzzing with relief. The principal approached me once more. "Would you like to see her?" he asked carefully, as if stepping on glass. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked out into the hallway, heading toward the small office. My footsteps were silent against the floor, but somehow my mother sensed me. Her head lifted slowly, and when her eyes landed on me, something in her expression cracked. Not anger, not pride, but something raw and unfamiliar. She stood abruptly. Her voice broke. For the first time in my life, she didn't look composed or stern or superior. She looked lost, fragile,
Small.
"Are you okay?" she whispered, as if she didn't believe the words belonged to her.
I didn't respond.
She took a step closer, hesitation trembling through her whole body. I didn't know where you were," she said. "Your father said you were safe, but I couldn't sleep. I thought you weren't suffering." The irony burned in my chest. Suffering? I lived in a penthouse. I earned more in a quarter than she had in her entire career. But she didn't know that. She never bothered to ask who I really was. "I'm helping the school," I said simply. Her eyes widened. "You? But how?" "Cybersecurity," I replied. Her face drained of color. "You're the one they brought in? The one everyone said was the only chance we had?" I didn't nod.
I didn't speak. She understood anyway.
Her breath trembled. Her fingers curled against her palms. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered, the question dragging decades of weight behind it. "Why didn't you tell us you were successful?" "Because it wouldn't have mattered," I said quietly. "You never cared about who I was, only who you wanted me to be." She closed her eyes, tears threatening but never falling. "I'm sorry," she whispered so softly it barely existed. "We made mistakes. Big ones." I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready. Instead, I turned slightly. "The breach will be contained within the next 24 hours. You won't lose your job." Her breath caught. Not relief, shock. "You're saving me after everything?"
"I'm doing my job," I said.
Her heart cracked visibly at those words. I didn't stay to comfort her. I didn't need her gratitude. I didn't crave her forgiveness. She had broken me long before she needed me. And now she finally understood the weight of the child she threw away. I stepped out of the school building feeling nothing. No triumph, no revenge, no satisfaction. Just cold clarity. My parents were drowning, and I was the lifeline they didn't deserve, but desperately needed. And they still had no idea what was coming next, because I hadn't yet decided whether saving them was mercy or a mistake. I didn't plan on showing up at my parents' house again, not because I feared what they'd say, but because I had already buried that version of myself. The boy who needed them, the son who waited for scraps of affection, the kid who still believed that maybe one day they'd see him as something other than a disappointment. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor, because the moment my company landed a government contract worth more than my father had ever seen in his lifetime, the media plastered my name everywhere. Interviews, tech panels, investment conferences. Suddenly, I was the youngest CEO to scale to 8 figures before 25. And somehow, inevitably, that information slithered back to the very people who told me to sleep on a sidewalk. I knew something was off when I got a call from an unknown number at 7 a.m. I answered only because I thought it might be one of our international partners. Instead, I heard my mother's voice trembling like a woman who had forgotten how to breathe. "We need to talk," she whispered, as if I owed her the softness she never gave me. "Your father, he didn't mean to say what he said. Things were hard. He's been stressed." I could practically hear her trying to crawl back into the role of loving parent, but I had lived through the truth, and the truth didn't shake. "Is this about the articles?" I asked flatly. Silence. Heavy, guilty silence. Then she finally exhaled. "Your father saw them, we both did, and maybe we misjudged." "Misjudged?" I laughed, not loudly, but with the kind of disbelief that only comes from someone who survived the fire they were thrown into. You told me to live in the streets. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just shifted blame like she always did. We were scared, Beta. You weren't doing anything with your life. We thought tough love would help. Tough love. The phrase people use when they want to justify cruelty. The phrase cowards use when they don't want to admit they gave up on their own child. Your father wants to see you, she added weakly. He's proud of you. Proud? Now that the world was praising me? Now that my net worth was being calculated publicly? Now that I became the one thing he always worshipped, successful? I'm busy, I replied simply. We can schedule something in a few weeks. She immediately panicked. No, not weeks. We need to talk today. It's urgent. That was when I knew something was wrong. Not emotionally wrong. Not family wrong. Financially wrong. I arrived at their house only because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. The house where I grew up, the house I was thrown out of, the house that was supposed to symbolize family but had only ever represented conditional love. When I stepped inside, my father didn't look proud. He looked desperate. He had lost weight. His hair was thinner. His shirt was wrinkled. He never wore anything wrinkled. And the moment he saw me, his expression didn't say, "My son is here." It said, "Maybe he can save me." "Beta," he said softly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sit. We have things to discuss." My mother brought out tea as if we were guests visiting from some foreign country, not their own son who once begged for approval. I sat, letting the silence make them uncomfortable. Finally, my father inhaled deeply, as if preparing for the role of a lifetime. "We made mistakes," he began. "We shouldn't have forced you out like that. It was wrong. We realize that now." I almost burst out laughing. Not because he apologized, he didn't, but because he thought this pathetic performance would work on someone who had built an empire from nothing. "What do you want?" I asked. No softness. No pretense. Just the truth. He flinched. My mother looked down. And then my father dropped it. The real reason I was suddenly worth contacting again. "We need help," he said. "Financial help." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't soften. "Say the full sentence," I told him. He swallowed hard. "We need money." How poetic. The man who once said, "You're not worth a single rupee," now needed mine. The man who told me to go live in the streets now wanted me to rescue him from losing the house he threw me out of. I leaned back slowly. "So let me get this straight," I said. 3 years ago, you kicked me out with nothing. Now you want millions." He didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. "You're successful," he said quietly. "You're doing well. You can help family." Family. The one word that had destroyed more people than love ever had. I stared at him, this man who thought fatherhood was something he could claim when convenient. "You're right," I finally said. "I'm doing extremely well." His eyes brightened with hope. Then I ended it. "But I don't help strangers." His face collapsed. My mother gasped. Silence fell heavy like a storm. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. And why father didn't speak for a full 10 seconds after I told him I didn't help strangers. He just stared at me, stunned, like someone had ripped the script out of his hands mid-performance and forced him to improvise honesty for the first time in his life. My mother was the first to break. She grabbed my arm, her fingers trembling, her voice cracking with the same desperation she once used to convince relatives that I was the family disappointment. "You can't say that," she whispered harshly, as if the neighbors might hear the truth. "We're your parents. You can't abandon us." Abandon? The irony burned hotter than the tea she'd served. They abandoned me the day they shoved me out the front door with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a lecture about how failure was genetic. They abandoned me long before that. Really, every time they mocked my ideas, every time they compared me to cousins, every time they looked at me like I was the family defect. I pulled my arm back gently, but firmly. "You abandoned me first," I said. My father finally snapped out of his stupor. His beard shook as his jaw tightened, the old version of him surfacing. The version that believed volume was authority and anger was logic. "We didn't abandon you," he barked. "We were teaching you responsibility. Look how successful you became without us. That proves we were right." I raised an eyebrow. "You're taking credit for kicking me out?" He straightened. "If we hadn't pushed you, you'd still be wasting time. You should thank us." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the delusion was so pure, so untouched by reality, that it was practically clinical. "You didn't push me," I said. "You discarded me." My father's nostrils flared, but before he could speak, I continued. "And your sudden interest in my life has nothing to do with pride or love. It has everything to do with the bank letters sitting on the dining table behind you." His eyes darted, just for a second, but it was enough. I saw the truth. They were drowning financially. When they kicked me out, they believed I'd fail quietly. That I'd become the cautionary tale they could use to lecture cousins during Eid dinners. Instead, I built something they could never control, and now they wanted a piece of it. "Beta," my mother said again, softer this time. "We didn't know you were doing so well. If you had known," I cut in, "you wouldn't have kicked me out?" She froze. My father looked away. There it was. Their truth in its naked, ugly form. Their love had conditions. Their acceptance had conditions. Their support had conditions. Their idea of family had conditions. But my success? My success was unconditional. It existed whether they respected me or not. "We need your help," my father finally said, voice small now. "If we lose this house, it will destroy us." I looked around. The living room I once played in. The wall where my height was marked every year until they stopped caring. The couch where my father yelled at me for wanting to study computer science instead of becoming an accountant like he demanded. This house had never been my home. It had been a stage for their disappointment. "So, what do you want?" I asked quietly. He leaned forward. "A loan," he said. "Or maybe an investment. You could buy the house in your name. Let us stay. We can pay you back slowly." I studied him. The prideful man who once shouted, "You will never amount to anything," now sitting across from me asking for mercy. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated, then mumbled the number. It was nothing to me now, less than the amount my company spent monthly on server scaling. But that wasn't the point. The point was the principle. "You know," I said slowly, 3 years ago, if you had shown me even a single drop of kindness, I would have helped you without hesitation." My mother's eyes softened with hope. "But you didn't," I continued. "And that version of me, the one who needed you, the one who begged for your approval, he doesn't exist anymore." My father stood abruptly. "So, you're really going to let us fail?" "No," I said, standing too. "I'm going to let you experience the consequences you taught me to survive." He opened his mouth, but I was already walking toward the door. "Wait," my mother cried, rushing after me. "At least think about it. Please, just think." I turned to her, finally allowing the truth to leave my chest like smoke escaping a burning room. "I did think about it," I said, "for 3 years. Then I stepped outside, letting the door close behind me with a soft, final click, the kind of sound that doesn't echo, but still ends everything that I walked away from that house expecting anger to chase me, guilt to cling to me, or some old childhood instinct to drag me backward. But nothing came. No weight. No fear.
No second-guessing.
Just silence. Clean, sharp, liberating silence. I didn't owe them anything, not anymore, not ever again. And the moment that realization settled into my chest, it felt like someone had cut a chain I didn't know I was still dragging. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they'd swallow their pride, deal with the consequences, maybe even learn something. But narcissists don't learn. They retaliate. The next morning, my phone notifications exploded, not from investors or board members, but from random numbers sending screenshots of a Facebook post my father had made at dawn. "Our son abandoned us in our time of need," he wrote. "We raised him, fed him, educated him, and now he refuses to help his own parents. Money has made him heartless. Pray for us." It had thousands of comments within hours. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were tagging me, shaming me, calling me ungrateful. Family friends were sharing it with crying emojis. Even a few of my old neighbors chimed in, claiming they always knew I would change once I got rich. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. My inbox was drowning with messages, from numbers I didn't recognize, from cousins who never invited me to anything, from uncles who once told me I'd never be a real man, from aunties who accused me of being lazy when I stayed up all night coding. All of them suddenly believed they had the moral high ground because my parents had played the victim. They had rewritten history overnight. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't post anything. I didn't even bother calling them. Because I didn't need to. And they had no idea what was coming. 2 days later, an investigative business blog published an article titled, "The Untold Story Behind the Young CEO Who Outsmarted the Tech World." The journalist had reached out weeks ago for a deep dive profile, and I had agreed before any of this family drama started. The timing, however, was poetic. The article wasn't about my parents, but it absolutely exposed the truth they'd tried to bury. It talked about how I was kicked out at 19, how I lived in a hostel room eating instant noodles, how I coded at coffee shops because I didn't have electricity, how every investor rejected me until one took a chance, how I slept under my desk the night our servers crashed because I couldn't afford staff yet, how I built everything brick by brick while the people who should have supported me instead told me I was a burden. It didn't name my parents, but it didn't have to. Everyone could read between the lines. The comments section exploded. Your parents kicked you out? And now they want money? Bro, don't give them a single rupee. Cut them off permanently. And then came the dagger. An old neighbor anonymously commented under the article, confessing everything. How my father screamed at me for choosing IT. How my mother told people I was a failure. How they bragged about throwing me out to teach me a lesson. How they mocked me behind my back for a year, right up until my name hit the news. The post went viral. My father's Facebook post backfired instantly. Their friends stopped siding with them. Relatives deleted their accusatory comments. Even family friends quietly unfollowed them. And for the first time in their lives, my parents were exposed without me having to say a single word. 3 weeks later, I found out they lost the house. Not because I checked, but because one of their neighbors posted a video of them moving their furniture into a small rented portion, arguing loudly about whose fault it was. The neighbor captioned it, "They should have treated their son better." It had over 1 million views. I didn't laugh. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel joy in their downfall. I just felt distant. Like I was watching strangers live out the consequences of choices they made long before I ever became successful. The same evening, while I stood on the balcony of my penthouse overlooking the entire city, something younger me would have never believed possible, I got a message. A simple one. From my father. "Are you happy now?" I stared at it for a moment, then typed my answer. "I was happy 3 years ago, the moment you closed the door." I didn't send money. I didn't send help. I didn't send apologies. I didn't send anything else. I just blocked the number. And that was it. That was the day I finally understood. Sometimes the best revenge isn't success. Sometimes the best revenge is walking away and never looking back.